we are going to look at ethics in autism, simply because autism brings in a lot of controversial debates, especially that we have got different people with different views about autism. So today I'm just going to look at 7 questions that directly connects with ethics in autism. So the first question we are going to look at is autism a disorder or identity? So autism can be defined in many ways and perspectives. And one question to consider is if it is a disorder or an identity. Autism definition has shifted over time and makes it very difficult to understand it, makes it very difficult to come up with one definition. So, hence, in 2018, pointed out that autism has been described as a problem with communication, maintaining social relations, and cognitive deficits. Yet, individuals with specific cognitive styles may not share the same neurology, and not everyone with those characteristics meet the diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorder. Each autistic individual is different, hence which I'm going to talk later about the neurodiversity movement. But at the moment, we can have some people with communication problems or issues maintaining social relations, and that necessarily does not mean they are autistic. So what you want to look at is that the rise of the neurodiversity movement came from the view that autism is not a disease, but an identity. That is trying to answer that question I asked earlier, that is autism a disease or an identity? So, the neurodiversity movement argue that autism should not be cured. Any attempt to cure it will result in changing their identity. So what they are saying is, if one is autistic, we don't have to cure them. The moment we try to cure that, we are changing their identity, because to them, autism is their identity. Still, then we have the problem now. This is the debate whereby those with more challenging autism needs, who can't express themselves, who can't talk for themselves, who cannot narrate their own stories, will eventually miss out on medical services and support, simply because if you want to stick with the idea of autism as an identity, then many autistic people are likely to lose on the medical services and support they also need. And then, what of those autistic individuals who are unable to express themselves? Are they well represented by the neurodiversity movement? So here we are saying that, the advocates for neurodiversity are saying that it should not be cured. That's okay. But at the same time, are they speaking for everyone who is autistic? This is the question. Or they are speaking for just a few who are able to advocate, who are able to narrate their stories. And then the second question is, then, should autism be cured or treated? Now, this again has a problem here, that one person who focuses on autism as a psychiatric diagnosis based on the certain behavior associated with dysfunction would argue that autism should be cured. Hence, we've got the medical model of disability. But we have others as well who see autism as a neurological or cognitive reality with a genetic basis. And they would argue that an autistic person needs support. Hence, we get social model of disability. So from these two arguments again, for these two camps to agree, the medical model of disability or the social model of disability, for them to agree, they have to see autism from the same perspective, which they do not. And it raises concerns as well. And in question 3, is autism a disorder in the spectrum? First of all, I would like to personally, I do not use the word disorder. So, because already once you use the word disorder, it carries its connotations, it brings in issues of stigma into autism. So I personally don't use disorder. But here, for the sake of this argument, some agree that autism is on a spectrum range, and others still disagree at this point. But what autistic people have been telling us is that no two autistic individuals are identical. But this raises the question of whether we should view autism as an entity on its own or as a disorder in a spectrum. So this also raises concerns for autism researchers. What I'm saying here is that should researchers stop researching autism as an all-embracing phenomenon, or they just should focus on specific traits such as autism in a race or autism in children only, a certain group of things, instead of looking at autism as an all-embracing phenomenon. The advantage is, of course, when you look at autism, bringing in at this individual level, there is an advantage of looking that we can provide suitable services and support, which is correct, to that specific person. Because autistic people themselves narrate how differently they feel. So in this case, we are saying that when we research on autism, we stop researching on autism as an umbrella term, but we have to zoom it in onto traits, maybe genetics, race. And then question 4 is looking at would it be permissible to abort a fetus identified as autistic? This brings again ethics. So possibly in the medical model of disability, the doctors, the medical people could argue that, look, if you want to have a child who is autistic, make a choice. And the neurodiversity movement could come and say, hey, hang on here, why should you do that? Because being autistic is not a disability per se, it is an identity. So who are you to terminate the life of an autistic to-be child based on autism? And again, we have a debate. It's an ethical question I'm raising here, because autism can be detected from birth as well. So, are interventions aiming to change behavior embracing autism as an identity? Some interventions aim to discourage repetitive behaviors, even though some of these behaviors could be helping autistic people cope with outside sensory issues. It can be argued that interventions aiming to change the behavior of autistic individuals is not embracing autism as an identity. In fact, it is an attempt to change the autistic individual. So we know of a lot of interventions we've heard about where autistic young people are coerced, are forced actually to change the way they are behaving so that they can behave in a way seen as suitable by the society or by the people who are introducing the intervention. But in that process, we forget that some autistic people behave in a certain way simply because they want to cope with the environment. It's not necessarily about the way they behave every time. So if we try to eradicate the problem in the environment that is causing that persistent behavior, in that way, we can also stop the repetitive behavior. So in this case, we are dealing with the environment, not dealing with the autistic person, simply because we don't want to change the behavior of the autistic person. And that's debatable as well, because we have got people who bring all sorts of interventions, and some of them are quite unethical when you look at them. And should autistic individuals be excused from transgressive actions since they lack cognitive empathy? Now, this argument comes from the view that some autistic people lack cognitive empathy or have a deficit in the capacity for empathy. However, other psychologists point out that there are different types of empathy anyway. While autistic individuals may lack cognitive empathy, they argue that they excel on affective empathy and are so sensitive for another person's feelings that they sometimes fence themselves off. So, this raises the question of whether autistic individuals should be excused for transgressive actions. Again, this takes us back to the argument of being different. That is, if autism is not a disease but an identity, transgressors should then be treated as individuals, similar the way we treat non-autistic people. So the repercussions for this is, take it this way: an autistic person goes to court, and we argue that autistic people are individuals as they are, and it's their identity. So we should not throw the book that because they are autistic, so we have to be lenient on our judgment. Because each and every person is an individual. This is the problem now. I'm looking at here that if we look at autism in general as it is, as one blanket term, should we excuse autistic people since they lack cognitive empathy? If they do something because they lacked cognitive empathy here, so should we pardon them for that? Or we simply say, no, cognitive empathy, lack of it does not apply to every autistic person. So every autistic person must be judged as an individual. So this throws through the window the whole argument of cognitive empathy or theory of mind, which is, should we disregard self-reports done by autistic individuals as they have theory of mind deficit. So this theory of mind hypothesis argues that autistic individuals show deficits in attributing mental states not only to others but also to themselves. Therefore, the ability to reflect on themselves is put in doubt and makes it hard to accept their self-reports. That's a challenge. Let's go back to neurodiversity. Neurodiversity agree autistic people are different in every aspect. And also we looked at in neurodiversity, this is not a disability, but it's an identity. And we have got a lot of narratives from autistic people. But how can we agree and say, look, what autistic people are saying should be taken for granted? Yet at the same time, we doubt them because of this theory of mind deficit. Their mental state, exhibit deficits, not only to others, but also to themselves. And it makes it very difficult to have a narrative from autistic people. Yet at the same time, we are aiming every day. We want to hear the voices of autistic people narrating their own lived experiences. But at the same time, once you throw such a theory like this one, theory of mind, you start to question yourself, how accurate is this theory of mind? And autistic people claim to be different in all aspects of their autism. And making a self-report on autism is non-representative of the autism family, because we have already agreed that they're individuals, they're different. So we cannot take one report from one autistic person and apply it to every autistic individual. And again, it brings the issue of autism spectrum range. It is also challenging to know the autism spectrum range an autistic person is when making a self-report. That needs to be looked at. So one's report should not be taken to embrace views of other autistic individuals, further creating another question of how best we can capture the autistic views of marginalized groups, such as Black autistics and those with communication difficulties, because they don't follow in the same bracket with some of the advocates we hear talking about autism, writing about autism, researching about autism. Some of them can't even say anything about themselves. And yet we put the same bracket of autism on each and every individual. On the other hand, we argue that they are different in all aspects. So these are some of the questions which I'm looking further to explore in my research, which I need to carry, looking at the philosophy of justice, ethics, and disability, linking in with autism. So finally, I would like to thank you for just going through these questions. We need to debate more about these questions, and I'm so thankful that you had time to go through this presentation. For more of my articles, you can read them on ResearchGate, and I'm also inviting you to follow me on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Thank you very much.